Hi everyone! Tonight we step into the quiet corridors of the medieval world, a realm of stone, smoke and survival. The firelight flickers against the walls of a fortress that has withstood centuries, and as the night deepens, we begin to understand what life truly felt like within these cold and echoing halls. At first glance, a castle might seem majestic, its towers bold against the dawn, its banners fluttering in the wind. But behind those thick stone walls lies a truth most of us have never imagined. Castles were not cozy havens. They were cold, damp, and brutally uncomfortable. The kind of cold that sinks into your bones and refuses to leave. Imagine standing barefoot on a stone floor as the sun sets beyond the battlements. Your breath clouds before you, even indoors. The warmth of the day fades fast, and the stones, beautiful yet merciless, leach away what little heat remains. Historians often praise castles as architectural marvels, but for those who lived in them, they were fortresses first and homes second. The truth is, these grand structures were designed for defense, not comfort. Every tower, every corridor, every wall was built to resist sieges and invaders, not the chill of winter. They were made to withstand catapults and arrows, not to trap warmth. That meant that when the night came, every resident, lord or servant, had to fight a different kind of battle, the battle against the cold. Picture the great hall now, lit by torches that sputter and smoke. The air is thick, heavy with the scent of damp wool, burning tallow and roasted meat. At the center burns a fire so large it seems alive, its glow illuminating faces flushed from the heat. But step just a few paces away and you're back in the shadows, shivering. The warmth doesn't travel. It clings to the fire pit and dies at the edge of its light. The stone walls act like sponges, soaking up the cold from the night air. Windows are little more than narrow slits covered with oiled cloth or shutters, doing nothing to block the drafts. Curtains flutter where no wind should be, proof that the castle itself breathes with icy lungs. You pull your cloak tighter, but it barely helps. Still, the people who lived here adapted. They layered wool upon linen, fur upon wool until they were more bundle than body. They drank hot ale spiced with herbs, rubbed their hands before the fire, and carried heated stones wrapped in cloth to bed. Every act was a small defiance against the freezing dark. In noble households, servants moved through the night like silent phantoms, tending fires, shutting doors, and banking embers beneath ash to keep them alive till morning. They knew the importance of that last flicker of heat. Without it, the castle would be a tomb by dawn. For peasants, things were simpler, but sometimes better. Their small cottages, built of timber and mud, trapped heat more easily than vast stone halls. One hearth could warm a family. The lord's grand chamber, though filled with tapestries and furs, could not compete with the snug warmth of a peasant's hut. Ironically, the poorest often slept warmer than the rich, but this story isn't just about cold, it's about endurance. It's about how people found ways to live, love and rest in conditions that would drive most of us to misery. They turned necessity into habit, habit into culture. They found meaning in discomfort. As the night deepens, the sounds of the castle change. The laughter from the great hall fades, replaced by the hollow echo of footsteps in distant corridors. You hear the wind pressing against shutters, the groan of wood under strain, the slow drip of water seeping through stone. A dog barks somewhere in the courtyard, then falls silent. Inside your chamber, you draw the bed curtains closed and climb under layers of blankets, linen, wool, fur. The bed stands high, not for luxury, but to escape the cold air that pools near the floor. The straw mattress beneath you creaks, releasing the faint scent of dried grass and dust. Outside, frost creeps across the windows, glittering in the firelight. The room is silent except for the faint hum of the wind. You feel the heat from the hearth fade inch by inch, until only your own body warmth remains. The air tightens, biting at your fingers. You pull the covers closer, bury your face in the fur and wait for sleep to come. To live in a medieval castle was to know both power and discomfort. The same walls that kept enemies out also imprisoned their inhabitants in unrelenting cold. But somehow, through ritual and resilience, they endured. They learned the rhythm of stone and fire, of frost and dawn. So tonight, as we begin our journey through this world of endurance and invention, remember, life in a castle was not about comfort. It was about survival. And in that survival lies the true strength of those who came before us. The night inside the medieval castle stretches long. Hours pass slowly when every sound echoes, and every draught feels like a whisper from the earth itself. The fire in the great hall burns low, throwing deep red light across the walls. What was once the center of warmth now looks like a glowing wound in the middle of endless stone. Around it, a few figures linger, servants clearing away the remains of the feast, a watchman half asleep near the door, the Lord himself seated in silence, staring into the flames as though they hold answers the dark refuses to give. Beyond that circle of light, shadows claim the room. This was the rhythm of the castle night. Even the noblest life moved by the pulse of the fire. Once the flames began to fade, the hall emptied. Guests withdrew to their chambers, servants vanished into stairwells, and the keep itself seemed to hold its breath. The great hall, for all its grandeur, was a place of contradictions. It was where people gathered, celebrated, and warmed their hands, and yet within the hour, it could turn from a feast hall into a cavern of cold silence. The temperature dropped as quickly as the laughter. You could feel it even in the air. The same breath that carried songs an hour ago now came out as frost. Imagine standing there alone in the faint red glow of coals. You'd hear the creak of timber, the far-off sigh of the wind threading through arrow slits, and perhaps the muted hum of voices behind heavy doors. Your boots would scrape the flagstone, each step echoing into the emptiness. It's a sound that makes you aware of how vast these spaces truly are. Historians often speak of castles as symbols of power, but inside, power offered no warmth. Even kings could not command the weather. A monarch's crown might glitter with jewels, but at night it offered less comfort than a peasant's woolen hood. To those who lived then, heat was more valuable than gold. Entire hierarchies formed around it. The highest-born sat nearest the fire, the lesser ranks further back, each step away a descent into the cold. To move too far from the hearth was to lose not just warmth, but place. The architecture itself reinforced this truth, fire and status intertwined. Now picture the servants' passageways behind the hall. Narrow, twisting corridors with walls slick from centuries of damp. The torches here burn weakly, hissing as droplets fall from the ceiling. The air tastes of ash and mildew. You can almost hear the shuffle of feet, tired, deliberate, moving from one chamber to another. These unseen workers kept the castle alive through the night, feeding fires, carrying wood, fetching water that froze before it reached the bucket's brim, and all the while the cold kept creeping back. It rose from the floors, slid through keyholes, drifted down chimneys. You could never fully escape it. The only defense was movement, work, or fire. Without one of those, you froze. As midnight deepened, even the guards felt its grip. On the battlements, men huddled in cloaks, stamping their feet, blowing into their hands. The wind at those heights was cruel, a blade sharper than any sword. They patrolled not just against intruders, but against sleep, against the numbing cold that dulled the senses. One moment of weakness, and frostbite or worse could claim them. Below, in the women's chambers, the scene was different, but no less harsh. A maid adjusts a curtain. Another stokes a small brazier of coals, and the lady of the house lies in her bed, eyes open, listening to the winter groan beyond the walls. Her hands are wrapped in linen, her hair covered by a nightcap, yet still she feels the cold pressing against her skin. She prays for morning, though morning brings only a different kind of chill. It's strange to imagine that what we call luxury today was, back then, simply less suffering. A fur-lined robe, a canopy bed, a roaring fire, none brought comfort, only delay. So much effort spent chasing what the walls refused to give, warmth, and yet, despite it all, life went on. The rhythm of castle living was one of acceptance. No one expected perfect comfort, only endurance. Warmth wasn't a right, it was a gift. And when people found it, even briefly, they cherished it deeply. You might picture that moment when the Lord finally rises from his chair, the hall now silent. He gestures to the last servant, who rakes the embers and spreads ash across the fire. The glow dims. The torches are snuffed. The great doors creak shut. Darkness claims the room. Then the castle becomes something else entirely. No longer a place of celebration, but a fortress of quiet vigilance. Each heartbeat, each creak, each whisper feels louder. The cold settles in like a living presence, patient and certain. If you listen closely, you can almost hear it, the breath of the castle itself. It moves through the corridors, between the stones, across the floors strewn with rushes. It sighs against the windows and hums beneath the doors. You realize then that to live here was to live in constant conversation with the cold. And so, before you retreat to your bed, you stop for a moment near the dying fire. You stretch out your hands toward the last faint heat, eyes closing, trying to remember what warmth feels like. You hold that memory close as you climb the stairs, one slow step at a time, the air growing colder the higher you go. When you reach your chamber, frost has already formed on the inside of the window. You push the door open, slip inside, and close it behind you. The silence is so deep it almost hums. You undress only enough to breathe, keeping your linen shirt and woolen hose on. You crawl into bed, pulling curtains tight, burying yourself beneath the layers until darkness and fabric swallow you whole. And there in that small, fragile cocoon, surrounded by stone and night, you wait for sleep. Outside the wind howls. Inside your heart beats steady and small. The castle holds you, cold, heavy, unyielding, and somehow you endure. By the time the castle settles into its deepest quiet, the night becomes almost timeless. The line between waking and dreaming blurs in the half-dark. You can imagine the entire world outside buried in frost. Trees creaking under ice, rivers locked still, the sky heavy with clouds that never move. Inside, life continues in whispers. The last of the torches gutter and die, their smoke curling toward the vaults like ghosts of the day. In this silence, even small sounds become enormous. The tick of cooling metal from the hearth, the faint rustle of a mouse under the rushes, the slow breath of someone sleeping in the next room, all carry through the stone. Medieval life was lived close to the senses. There was no hum of machines, no distant traffic, no background murmur to drown out thought. In the absence of noise, you felt the weight of the building itself. It is in moments like this that you understand how isolation shaped the people who lived here. A castle at night was not a place of warmth or comfort. It was a place of waiting. You waited for dawn, for news, for spring, for something to remind you that time was still moving. The cold made patience a virtue, and silence a form of prayer. Now imagine yourself moving through one of these chambers in that hush. The floor is strewn with rushes, dry reeds layered thick across the stones. They soften each footstep, crackling faintly beneath your boots. These weren't mere decoration. They served as primitive carpets, insulation and refuse collectors all at once. Each season, servants brought in new rushes, often mixed with herbs like lavender or rosemary to freshen the air. For a few days, the smell was clean and grassy, a hint of summer hidden beneath the winter damp. But soon enough the rushes darkened with spilled ale, grease and scraps of food. Mice found homes in them, insects too. By spring they were less comfort than compost. Yet they stayed until replaced, because the alternative was bare, freezing stone. Even the rich couldn't escape that compromise. Nobles who dined on silver still walked on rushes like everyone else. The peasant's floor and the lord's differed only in smell and thickness. The same mixture of earth, herb, and decay lay beneath their feet. Now shift your eyes to the walls. Tapestries hang heavy, their woven threads depicting hunts, saints, and battles. They seem to bring color to the room, but their purpose isn't purely art. They are another layer of defense, fabric meant to hold in heat, to soften the echo of the stone. Behind them, moisture condenses and runs down the wall, feeding the mildew that no one can quite banish. Servants sometimes lift the corners and find moss growing underneath, but still they hang them again, because to remove them would mean to let the cold speak louder. You can almost feel the air as it moves, slow, damp, alive. It smells of wool, ash, and age. It is not clean, but it is real, thick with the history of hands that have touched every object in the room, every bedpost polished by elbows, every latch worn smooth by fingers. Speaking of beds, these were the true sanctuaries of medieval life. To step inside one was to step into a fortress within a fortress. 4 tall posts rose at the corners, holding a canopy overhead and curtains on every side. When drawn shut, they created a small private climate, a tent of warmth in a world of stone. Inside those curtains, life felt different. Your breath warmed the air just enough to make it bearable. The smell of linen and wool filled your nose, mixed with the faint musk of fur and smoke. The world beyond the fabric could be frozen, but inside, you built your own pocket of comfort. Beds were layered like armor, straw mattresses topped with feather ticks, then linen sheets, then wool blankets, then furs. Some weighed so much that it took effort to move beneath them. But that was the point. Stillness trapped heat. To sleep was to lie motionless, to surrender fully to the cocoon you built. Servants sometimes slept nearby, curled on pallets or benches, both for duty and warmth. Even in a noble chamber, loneliness was rare. Someone was always there, breathing softly in the dark, tending the embers, guarding the night. That shared silence was part of the rhythm of survival. It wasn't only humans who shared that warmth. Dogs, too, were essential to the medieval bed. Small lapdogs slept under the blankets. Larger hounds stretched across the foot of the bed. Their body heat joined the rest, forming a living shield against the chill. To modernize, it might seem unhygienic, but in that world it was practical. A dog's warmth could mean an unbroken night's sleep, instead of hours of shivering. Now picture the chamber just before dawn. The fire has burned down to a faint red glow. The air is so cold that your breath fogs inside the bed curtains. You pull the furs tighter, listening to the castle breathe. Somewhere a rooster crows. A servant stirs in the adjoining passage, her footsteps muffled on the rushes. Soon she will bring wood, stir the ashes, and wake the fire back to life. This is how every day began in the medieval castle, with the slow rebirth of warmth. From ember to flame, from silence to sound, from sleep to movement. The ritual was as sacred as prayer. If you step outside now into the corridor, you'll feel the difference immediately. The cold there is absolute, a wall of air that steals your breath. Your fingers ache before you've taken 10 steps. You wrap your cloak tighter and move quickly, chasing the faint promise of light creeping through narrow windows. Even the staircases feel alive with the cold. The stone beneath your hand bites your skin. Your breath rises in clouds before your face. You begin to understand why people of this age spoke of winter as a creature, something that prowled and pressed, and never truly died. The fire was their weapon against it, and the bed their refuge. Between those 2 points, flame and blanket, medieval life found its fragile rhythm. Everything in between was struggle, endurance, and faith. As the first light touches the walls, you realize the night has passed. The cold hasn't vanished, but you've survived it again. That was the victory of the castle dwellers. Not comfort, not luxury, but endurance. They learned to live with the cold, to respect it, to build rituals around it. And in doing so, they created a world both harsh and deeply human. Outside, the frost still clings to every stone. Inside, the first fire of morning crackles back to life. Another day begins. Morning in a medieval castle did not bring comfort. It brought movement. The first rays of light were pale and weak, slipping through narrow windows like threads of silver that barely touched the frost. Breath still clouded in the air, and the first sound of the day was the shuffle of servants, the scrape of metal, the crack of wood as fires were coaxed back to life. The great hall, dark and silent for hours, began to stir. A servant knelt by the hearth, her fingers blackened with soot, as she pulled apart the banked ashes to find a faint red glow. Another added kindling, blowing softly until smoke curled upward, thin at first, then thicker as the fire caught. Sparks jumped, crackling like tiny stars before disappearing. The smell of burning oak spread through the hall, bitter, smoky, but alive. Around her, other servants swept the rushes, gathered empty cups, replaced candles, and shook out damp cloaks. The rhythm was methodical, practiced. Every morning began like this, every task done in near silence except for the fire's growing hum. The castle woke slowly, its people warming themselves not only with heat, but with habit. For the nobles still abed, the day began differently. Their chambers remained dim, their beds enclosed by heavy curtains. A lady's maid entered softly, carrying a candle, her footsteps barely audible. She drew back one corner of the curtain to let the light in, then poured warm water from a jug into a basin. Steam rose for a brief, luxurious moment, before fading back into the chill. The lady stirred, wrapping her woolen shawl tighter, rubbing her hands together before daring to wash. Water was rarely warm enough. Even the upper classes flinched from its bite. She dried her hands quickly, dressed in layers of linen, wool, and fur, and only then did she feel the faintest comfort. For servants there was no pause for warmth. They moved briskly, carrying buckets of water drawn from wells that sometimes froze overnight, hauling logs from the woodpile, chasing the endless tasks that kept the castle alive. The day's chores began before the sun had risen high enough to touch the courtyard. The smell of baking bread drifted faintly through the air, carried from the kitchens below. There, the fire had never truly gone out. The castle's heart burned, there day and night, feeding the ovens that baked loaves by the dozens, and heating the pots where pottage simmered for hours. To step into the kitchen was to step into another world entirely. Unlike the rest of the castle, the kitchen glowed with heat. Flames licked the sides of iron pots. Steam filled the air. The walls sweated with moisture, and the floor was slick with spills. Smoke curled upward through a hole in the ceiling, staining everything black. It was chaos and comfort together, the one place where warmth was constant. Cooks shouted orders, apprentices turned spits heavy with meat, and scullery maids scrubbed bowls in freezing water. The heat burned your skin at the front and froze it at the back. It was exhausting but alive, and for a few moments, even the lowliest worker could enjoy what the noble upstairs could not. True warmth. That warmth, however, did not travel far. Step out of the kitchen, and within seconds the cold reclaimed you. The corridors that connected one part of the castle to another were long and narrow, designed for defense, not comfort. Wind prowled through every gap, carrying the scent of smoke and stone. Servants hurried along these passageways, balancing trays or buckets, their breath visible as they moved. They wore rough wool and thick aprons, but still the cold bit at their hands and faces. Their pace wasn't just duty, it was survival. Standing still too long meant feeling the chill sink deep into your bones. By late morning the castle had fully awakened. The great hall filled with light and life again. Fires blazed, dogs sprawled near the hearth, and people moved with purpose. But even now comfort was an illusion. Those far from the flames kept their cloaks tight. Those nearest to it endured smoke in their eyes. There was no middle ground, only the choice between cold and discomfort. At the high table, the lord and lady took their first meal of the day. Coarse bread, cheese, ale warmed at the fire. They spoke little, voices low, the sound of cutlery mingling with the crackle of burning wood. Around them retainers stood ready, silent and still, despite the numbness creeping into their feet. Every aspect of this morning was ritual. The lighting of fires, the breaking of bread, the prayers before meals. It all gave order to a life that could easily feel overwhelming. In a world ruled by weather and stone, routine was its own kind of comfort. Beyond the walls the world glittered with frost. The fields lay silent, the moat rimmed with ice. From the towers, guards scanned the horizon, their cloaks snapping in the wind. The world outside was no gentler than the world within. But inside these walls, at least, people had made a fragile peace with the cold. They knew how to live within its grasp. Fires were fed at regular hours, doors kept tightly barred, bedding turned and dried by the hearth. Even the youngest servants learned to bank coals properly, for letting a fire die was no small mistake. It could take hours to bring the heat back, and during those hours, the chill would spread through every room. As the day went on, sunlight streamed through the windows, bright but deceiving. It lit the stone floors in gold but gave no warmth. The castle glowed, yet remained cold at its core. People learned to judge the difference between light and heat, to recognize that beauty and comfort were rarely the same. Every breath you took inside such a place was a reminder of that truth. The air always held a chill even at noon. The smell of smoke never left your clothes. And yet beneath that discomfort, there was a quiet resilience. The people who lived here did not curse their environment. They adapted to it. They layered, they worked, they laughed, they survived. By evening, the same fires lit again. The same torches flickered along the walls. And though the cycle repeated endlessly, it never lost its meaning. Because in a place where warmth was fleeting, every spark of fire, every shared cup, every laugh near the hearth meant life. To live in a medieval castle was to understand fragility, to know that every comfort was borrowed, every flame temporary. But that was enough. Enough to carry them through one more day, enough to believe that spring would come again. The fire crackles. The hall hums with low conversation. Outside, the wind begins to rise once more, and so as day slips back into night, the ancient rhythm resumes, stone, smoke, and survival, again and again. Evening returned quickly in the medieval world. Days were short, light was precious, and night came like a tide that no one could hold back. As the sun dipped behind the hills, the cold crept closer again, sliding through cracks and seams, reclaiming every inch of the castle that the day's fires had barely warmed. In the great hall, servants hurried to relight the torches, their flames sputtering as they caught. Candles were placed along tables and ledges, and once more the vast space came alive with shifting gold light. Shadows danced up the walls, and the carved beams above glimmered faintly through the haze of smoke. The smell of wax and tallow filled the air, thick but familiar. This was the hour when the castle came alive again, not with the warmth of the sun, but with the warmth of people. The lord and lady entered the hall wrapped in cloaks of fur, their breath faintly visible as they crossed the floor. Behind them came their household, knights, guests, attendants, and servants. Each one took a place according to rank, the hierarchy of warmth once again determining the seating. Near the hearth, the air shimmered with heat. Those lucky enough to sit close leaned back in comfort, their faces red from the fire. Further away, people rubbed their hands and stamped their feet, pretending not to feel the cold creeping through the soles of their shoes. But no one complained. It was part of the rhythm of life, a shared acceptance that warmth was a privilege, not a guarantee. The evening meal was both necessity and ceremony. Platters of roasted meat, trenchers of bread, and bowls of steaming stew were carried in from the kitchens, each dish cooling as it crossed the freezing corridors. The smell of food filled the room, mingling with the wood smoke. The first sip of hot ale, the first bite of warm bread was more than nourishment, it was relief. For a few hours the hall glowed with sound and life. Laughter echoed against the stone, dogs begged beneath tables, and music drifted through the air. A lute or a harp played softly in the corner, its strings catching the firelight. Minstrels sang tales of love and battle, their voices weaving warmth into the cold. But even in this comfort, the castle reminded its inhabitants who was in charge. The fire's heat never reached far. Step beyond the circle of its glow, and the chill returned instantly. The walls swallowed the warmth, the ceiling trapped the smoke, and the floor, always stone, remained cold no matter how many rushes were laid upon it. It's strange to imagine that the very same hall that hosted such feasts by night would, by dawn, look barren again. The tables cleared, the ashes cold, the air heavy with yesterday's smoke. Everything beautiful in this world was fleeting. Perhaps that's why people clung to the moments when light and warmth coincided. They knew how rare they were. When the meal ended, the hall shifted once more. The musicians grew quiet, the servants began to clear, and the guests lingered by the fire, stretching their hands toward the dying flames. Some stayed for conversation. Others simply sat in silence, letting the heat soak into their bones. The lord might retire to his solar, the lady to her chamber, and the servants returned to their endless duties, fetching wood, cleaning trenches, dousing candles. Soon the laughter faded. The torches burned lower. The fire sank into embers, and the hall fell silent once again. Now imagine walking through that quiet space after everyone has gone. The benches are empty, the rushes scattered with crumbs and ash. The only light comes from the hearth, glowing faintly red. The cold is creeping back, seeping down from the walls and up from the floor, reclaiming what it lost. You stand there for a moment, watching the last of the smoke spiral upward into the darkness above, and you realize that this is the heartbeat of the castle, its endless cycle of warmth and cold, of life and stillness. For the servants, however, the night was far from over. They moved through the corridors with buckets of water, checking that the fires were safely banked. Sparks could be deadly in a wooden-roofed hall. In the kitchens, a few embers were kept alive beneath layers of ash, ready to rekindle in the morning. The youngest servants, shivering in the corners, fought to stay awake until the last chore was done. Only then could they curl up on straw pallets near the warmth that lingered in the stones. For them, sleep was brief and light, but it was enough. The air might sting, the rushes might prickle, yet exhaustion brought a kind of peace. They slept beside each other, shoulder to shoulder, wrapped in thin blankets or cloaks. The rhythm of their breathing was its own lullaby, a soft reminder that even in hardship, there was community. In noble chambers, the night's rituals were slower and quieter. A maid laid out nightclothes near the hearth, warming them as best she could. Another turned the mattress, shook out the furs, and placed a heated stone wrapped in cloth at the foot of the bed. When her mistress finally entered, she undressed only as much as decency allowed, removing her outer layers, but keeping the rest for warmth. The curtains were drawn, candles extinguished, and silence returned. The last thing she heard was the crackle of the fire as it faded, and the low sigh of the wind outside. For all its grandeur, the medieval castle was a fragile thing at night. It depended on small flames, on careful habits, on the endurance of its people. Without them, it would have been nothing more than cold stone and empty air. And yet there was something profound in that struggle. The people of that world understood the value of small comforts. A shared cup of wine, a patch of sunlight through the window, a good fire that lasted till morning. They didn't take warmth for granted. They cherished it like treasure. Perhaps that is what life inside those walls was truly about, learning to find joy in moments that lasted only a little while. To see beauty not in luxury but in survival. To know that even in the darkest, coldest nights, the light of a single candle could hold back the void. Outside, the wind howls again. Snow begins to fall across the battlements. The guards pull their cloaks tight, their torches bending in the storm. Inside, behind thick walls, the castle holds its breath. The night deepens, and with it the same ancient ritual. The endless war between warmth and cold, life and stillness, fights on. Outside, the storm has gathered strength. The wind howls through the battlements like a beast searching for a way in. Snow lashes the towers, the flakes catching in torchlight before vanishing into the dark. Inside, the walls shudder faintly beneath each gust. But the castle endures, as it always has, immovable, ancient, defiant against the weather. In the upper chambers, the cold seeps in like a living thing. It presses against shutters, slides beneath doors, and finds its way into the very air you breathe. A candle flickers beside your bed, its flame bent sideways by a draught. The curtain fabric moves slightly, though the window is shut tight. This is what the medieval night truly felt like. A constant negotiation between the living and the elements. Down below, in the servants' quarters, the same battle plays out in simpler forms. The hearth is little more than a pile of glowing coals now, but still they gather around it. One servant mends a torn sleeve by firelight, her fingers stiff. Another nods off where he sits, his head resting on folded arms. In a corner, two dogs lie curled together, their fur rising and falling with slow breaths. The room smells of smoke, straw, and humanity, a mixture of survival. Above them, the Lord's family sleeps in heavy silence. Their rooms may have more space, more furs, and thicker curtains, but the air is no kinder. You can almost hear the creak of bedposts, the rustle of linen, the faint sigh of someone turning in their sleep. Even power cannot escape the night's chill. Yet amid all this discomfort, there is something deeply human about the scene. Everyone within the castle, from lord to scullery boy, shares the same enemy. The cold doesn't care for titles, and perhaps that's what made life here both harsh and strangely equalizing. In the dark hours, all were united by the same need, to endure until morning. The guards on the walls pace steadily, boots thudding against frozen stone. They glance at the horizon, though there's nothing to see but white. Their torches sputter in the wind, throwing brief flares of light before shrinking again. They are wrapped in cloaks lined with wool, but the wind finds every gap, biting through layers until skin burns. They don't speak much. Their voices would only be stolen by the storm. Instead, they move in rhythm, step turn step, each one silently counting down the hours till dawn. In the chapel, another kind of vigil continues. A single candle burns before the altar, its light reflected in the golden threads of a hanging tapestry. A monk kneels in prayer, his breath a visible mist. The stones beneath his knees are so cold that he feels them through his robes, yet he does not move. To him, the cold is part of devotion, a test of endurance and faith. The silence in the chapel is complete, broken only by the faint crackle of the candle wick and the murmur of words whispered to heaven. The castle at night was never truly still. It breathed, creaked, shifted. Somewhere a shutter banged open, somewhere a rat scurried across the rushes, somewhere a door moaned softly on its hinges. To live in such a place was to live with noise, not the noise of people or machines, but the voice of the building itself. It's easy to forget now, in our warm, insulated world, how alive stone once seemed. In the medieval night, you could hear it expand and contract with the temperature. The walls groaned like old trees, the floors popped with hidden frost. It wasn't silence, it was a slow, patient music that played without end, and in that sound there was something almost comforting. The castle was old, but it endured. No matter how the wind screamed outside, the walls stood firm. You could feel its strength beneath your fingertips when you touched the stone. It was as though the building itself promised to protect you, even as it froze you. Down in the stables, the horses shifted restlessly, their breath clouding the air. A stable boy dozed on a pile of hay, wrapped in an old cloak, his lantern dim beside him. The animals were as much a part of the castle's rhythm as its people. Their warmth, their smell, even their noise filled the dark with life. The sound of hooves against wood, the snort of a stallion, the soft crunch of straw, all reminders that the world still moved, still breathed even in winter's grasp. Somewhere, a mother hushes a child awake from a bad dream. Her voice is soft, barely more than a whisper, but it fills the small room like music. She pulls the child close, sharing what warmth she has. Outside their door, frost gathers on the iron latch, sparkling in the moonlight that seeps through the cracks. Everywhere in the castle, people sleep in fragments. No one truly rests. The night is too long, the cold too sharp. They drift in and out of dreams, pulled back to wakefulness by the creak of wood or the sting of cold air against their skin. And still they endure. Hours pass like slow tides. The storm fades. The wind grows tired. The castle exhales a long, low sigh, and the world outside turns pale again. The first hint of morning in the grey sky. One by one, fires are rekindled. Smoke begins to rise from the chimneys, curling upward into the cold dawn air. Inside, servants move quietly through the halls, shaking out blankets, carrying water, relighting torches. The castle wakes once more. It is the same as yesterday and the day before and countless days before that. But repetition is not despair, it is resilience. Each morning they rebuild what the night took away. Each ember reignited is proof that survival continues. The sun, faint and distant, finally reaches the walls. Its light spills across the courtyard, glinting on ice and stone. You can almost feel the collective relief of everyone inside. Another night has passed. The castle still stands. The people still live. And though the cold remains, they have met it once again and won, if only for another day. That was life in the medieval world. No triumph without struggle, no warmth without work, no dawn without the courage to outlast the dark. Dawn breaks over the castle in pale silence. The storm has passed, leaving behind a world washed in white. Every roof, every parapet, every field beyond the walls glitters beneath a thin crust of snow. Smoke rises slowly from the chimneys, curling into the sky like the breath of the sleeping earth. The cold remains, but the light changes everything. It gives shape and color to endurance. Inside, the castle begins to stir again. The servants move through the corridors, stamping their feet to wake the warmth back into their bodies. The first fires of the morning burn bright, filling the air with the smell of smoke and life. Metal clangs against stone as cauldrons are lifted, doors creak open, and buckets of water slosh against walls. The hum of another day begins. The great hall looks different in morning light. Its shadows are softer, its colors muted. The rushes on the floor gleam faintly where frost had gathered overnight. The embers from last night's fire still glow faintly, and from them the new flame is born. A servant kneels, blowing gently, coaxing orange from grey. It's a fragile, beautiful act, reviving warmth from what seems dead. As the fire catches, the hall begins to come alive again. People enter, wrapped in cloaks and scarves, rubbing their hands together. The clatter of wooden cups and plates echoes across the stone. Bread is sliced, cheese shared, and warm ale poured into rough mugs. There is no luxury here, only necessity. But necessity has its own kind of comfort. The Lord enters last, his footsteps deliberate, his breath steaming in the cold. He sits nearest the fire, as always, and begins the day's quiet rituals. A prayer, a sip of ale, a few murmured words to those beside him. Life continues in patterns that have been repeated for generations. It's easy to romanticize these moments, to imagine the castle as a world of chivalry and pageantry, but the truth is simpler and harsher. What kept these people alive was not grandeur but rhythm, the steady beat of work and rest, of cold and fire, of night and dawn. That rhythm was their strength. After breakfast, the castle returns to motion. Men-at-arms march in the courtyard, their armor glinting in the weak light. Horses stamp their hooves, their breath rising in clouds. From the kitchens comes the rhythmic sound of chopping, the hiss of water poured onto hot iron. Somewhere a child laughs, brief, bright, and quickly swallowed by the noise of the day. In the lady's solar, the scene is quieter. Sunlight filters through the windows, catching in the threads of embroidery. The lady sits with her maids, their heads bent over linen. Their fingers move steadily, stitching color into fabric. They speak little, their voices low, their words slow and measured. The work warms them, not with heat but with focus. It gives purpose to the cold. Elsewhere, scribes hunch over parchment in the scriptorium, copying letters with frozen fingers. Ink thickens in its pot, and they breathe upon it to thin it again. Each word they write seems a small victory against the numbness. Knowledge itself becomes a flame, a thing fragile yet enduring, passed from one cold hand to another through the centuries. The castle is alive in every corner, though not loudly. Its life is one of quiet persistence. The clatter of tools in the workshop, the murmur of prayer in the chapel, the soft tread of a servant carrying firewood, all form part of a single, steady rhythm. Step outside into the courtyard, and the cold greets you like an old companion. The snow crunches underfoot, the air bites clean against your skin. You look up at the towers, their edges sharp against the winter sky, and you realize how small you are within this vast machine of survival. Every stone, every flame, every heartbeat contributes to the same goal, to make it through the season intact. By midday, the sun climbs higher, but gives little warmth. The snow begins to melt only at the edges of the roofs, dripping slowly into the gutters. The people go about their work, faces red from cold, hands rough from labor. And yet, there is a kind of peace in it, a shared understanding that endurance itself is victory. In the afternoon, life softens. Children chase each other through the outer yard, their laughter bright against the grey air. The cook scolds them as they pass, but smiles when they're gone. The blacksmith's hammer rings from the forge, sparks flying like fireflies against the snow. The sound echoes through the walls, steady and comforting. The castle feels awake, alert, full of breath. Inside the chapel, candles burn low, their flames small but steady. The monk who prayed through the night now rests his hands upon the pew, eyes closed. His breath slows. In this fragile stillness, there is both weariness and grace. By late afternoon, the light begins to fade once more. The shadows stretch long across the courtyard. Smoke thickens in the sky. The people of the castle know what comes next. They do not fight the cycle, they prepare for it. Fires are built higher, wood stacked by every hearth, curtains drawn tight against the creeping dark. You can almost feel the shift in the air, the slow turning of day into evening, of warmth into chill. It's not despair they feel, but acceptance. This is the life they know, to keep the fire alive, to greet the cold as an inevitable guest, to trust that the morning will return, and as night begins its quiet descent, the castle once again glows from within. The torches are lit, their flames soft and golden. Shadows stretch across the walls like the folds of old fabric. Laughter stirs faintly from the great hall. The cold waits beyond the walls, patient and eternal, but for now the fire holds its ground, for now life continues. Night returns once more, the same and yet always new. The last of the sunlight fades from the high windows, and the castle begins its slow descent into darkness. The fires, now strong and bright, flicker against the stone, their light catching in ironwork and gilded carvings. The air smells of smoke and pine resin, of wax and wool. It is the scent of endurance, the smell of human life held together by flame. The great hall fills again. The same faces gather, the same routine unfolds. The serving of food, the clink of wooden cups, the hum of conversation. But beneath the familiarity lies something deeper, a quiet pride in having made it through another day. Every meal in winter feels earned, every fire a triumph over the world outside. Music rises faintly in the background, slow and soft, played on strings that shimmer in the firelight. A storyteller's voice follows, weaving tales of knights and spirits, of lost kings and returning heroes. The listeners lean close, their faces lit by orange glow and shadow. For a while they are transported somewhere else, somewhere warmer, safer, kinder than the cold stone surrounding them. Yet even stories must end. The music fades, the torches burn low, and one by one, the people drift away into the long corridors. Their footsteps echo briefly, then vanish into silence. The servants come last, clearing the tables, sweeping the rushes, banking the fires. They move with quiet efficiency, their breath faintly visible in the dim light. When the last torch is extinguished, the castle becomes a different creature. Its heart slows. The sound of the wind outside grows louder, pressing against the walls. Frost creeps across the glass, delicate and unstoppable. The world narrows to a few remaining embers, a few soft breaths. In your chamber, you sit beside the hearth, watching the fire sink into its final glow. The air feels heavy, almost sacred. You think of all the nights that have come before. Centuries of people doing the same thing, sitting where you sit, staring at the same fading light. Kings and peasants, knights and servants, all joined by this same ritual, waiting for the fire to die and hoping the dawn will return. You rise, pulling the curtains closed around your bed. The sound of the wind muffles, replaced by the soft rustle of fabric. The bed creaks as you settle in. The straw shifts beneath the weight. The furs rise around you. You listen to the faint heartbeat of the castle, wood groaning, embers sighing, the distant footsteps of a guard changing post. It's a symphony of endurance, ancient and familiar. Somewhere below, the kitchens still hum faintly. Someone stirs the coals, someone hums a quiet tune. The smell of smoke drifts upward through the floors, seeping into every chamber. It's not unpleasant. It's comforting, the scent of protection, the reminder that the fire still lives. Outside, the stars begin to appear. The clouds have cleared, leaving a sky sharp and glittering. From the tower, a lone sentry looks up at them, pulling his cloak tight. His torch burns small against the vastness of the night. The cold bites, but he stands firm. Below him, the castle lies still, a small island of warmth in a frozen world. Time moves differently here. Each hour stretches like an eternity, yet every night ends the same way, with the first hint of dawn crawling along the horizon. In that moment, when darkness softens and color returns to the world, you can almost feel the castle breathe again. The cold is still there, but the light pushes against it just enough to promise another day. The servants will rise soon, the fires will be fed, the hall will come alive once more. The same rituals, the same labors, the same quiet victories will repeat. And that is the miracle of this place. Not that it stands against time, but that its people did. They lived not for comfort, but for continuity. They endured not because they had to, but because they believed that life, however cold, was worth preserving. The medieval world was not a world of perfection. It was a world of effort, a constant struggle between survival and surrender. Yet within that struggle lay meaning. Every spark struck from flint, every blanket pulled close, every candle lit in the darkness was an act of defiance. Each one said the same thing: we are still here. As you drift towards sleep, you feel that message settle deep inside you. The fire hums softly, its glow painting the curtains gold from within. The wind outside howls one last time, then fades to a whisper. The cold will return tomorrow, as it always does, but for now, just now, the warmth holds. And in that small, flickering light, surrounded by stone and silence, you understand the truth of the castle. It was never just a fortress of walls and towers. It was a fortress of hearts, of people who refused to yield to the dark. The night deepens, the fire dims, but the story of their endurance burns on, eternal as the flame that once lit these halls.